Hi and welcome back to the channel. My name is Maarten and in this video I'll teach you how to add those sweet chord tones to your guitar solos by visualizing chord triads on the guitar neck. And this will help to improve your melodic phrasing and your audience will feel the harmony of your song better. In the first part of this video I'll give you some basic theory on chord tones, on triads and how we can locate them on the first 3 strings of the guitar, and in the second part we'll apply that little bit of theory to the melodic solo you just heard in the intro. That is part of a longer video on my channel. I'll put a link to that in the description. Also in the description you can find a link to the free lesson PDF that you can download from my blog. It has all the charts and tabs I use in this video. If you enjoy the content, make sure you subscribe and give the video a thumbs up. That really does help my channel. Alright, grab your guitar and let's dive in. Let's say you want to write a solo or you want to improvise over a 4-chord progression. And let's take A, E minor, G, D. That's also the progression we'll use later in the video. Now, one way to start an improvisation is by using a pentatonic scale, and most of the times that's a safe bet. That's a lot of fun. A pentatonic scale gives you a lot of freedom, but the downside is that not every note in that scale will sound as great when played over a certain chord. Enter chord tones, because when you start adding notes that are actually part of the underlying chord as it's being played by the rest of the band, your solos will start sounding more melodic and more meaningful. But for this to work, you have to be aware of which chord is being played and what notes are actually part of that chord. Now for basic chords, these chord tones are always the root, the third, and that can be a minor third for a minor chord or a major third for a major chord, or the fifth. And these circled numbers here, you'll see them quite a lot in this video. They will represent my basic chord tones. So for example, for that first chord in our progression, for the A, what are these chord tones? Well, they are the root, A, the third, the note that is a major third interval above that root, the C sharp, and the fifth, the note that is a perfect fifth interval above that root, in this case, the E. This is all you need to have an A major chord. Now you probably learned how to play an A chord like this. But as you can see on the diagram, all that's in there are these 3 basic chord tones. Some of them are just played twice, like the root A and our fifth E. The C sharp, the third, is only played once in this chord shape. When you arrange these 3 basic chord tones closely together, stacked in thirds on 3 adjacent strings, they are called a triad. Each basic chord tone is played once in a triad. So think of a triad as a minimal way of playing a chord. Now the basic triad for A major is this little shape I showed you already, with the root on the G string, the major third on the B string, and the fifth on the E string. In fact, for reference, you could also look at this as the top half of an open A chord. Now this is also an A major triad. This triad has the same notes, so it must be an A major triad, but the notes are now played on different strings. Now we have the third on the G string, the fifth on the B string, and the root on the E string. And this is what's called the first inversion. It's just another way of arranging these 3 basic chord tones with the third now as the lowest note in our triad. And this is the second inversion. Again, the same 3 notes, the same basic chord tones, but rearranged again with the fifth now as the lowest note played on the G string. The root is played on the B string, and the third is now the highest note on the E string here. So to recap, here are my 3 major triad patterns on the E, B, and G strings. Basic triad, first inversion, second inversion. So there's a lot you can do with 3 notes. And after the 12th fret, everything just repeats. And so on. For minor chords, we have minor triads. The only difference between major and minor chords is that the third interval is lower the half step. So that means we have to lower each third in the pattern half a step. So for example, for E minor, these are the minor triads. What is great about these triad patterns is that they are movable. So for each major chord, these patterns on these 3 strings are the same. You only have to move them up or down the guitar neck as your chord and your root is different. But to me, visualizing these triad patterns as I'm improvising turned out to be a much more efficient way of finding the chord tones than memorizing all the notes that make up each triad. And believe me, I tried, only to realize that sometimes I couldn't recollect the chord tones quickly enough. But now I like to improvise, for example, starting off with a pentatonic scale and using that as a bass layer, and then putting these triad patterns on top. It's like these triad patterns light up in my mind and they show me where the chord tones are in relationship to a pentatonic scale, for example. Let's analyze this 8-bar solo and we'll take it 1 bar at a time. The chord progression for this track is A, E minor, G, and D. And this solo uses mostly the basic chord tones for these 4 chords. On the right side of the screen, you'll see the tabs and notation, and on the left side, I'll show you which triad pattern or triad patterns I'm referencing. So you'll see the chord tones, you'll recognize the circled numbers. Also, I'll show you a bit more than just the chord tones because I'm also playing notes in between the chord tones to connect them. This keeps the melody flowing, so don't worry if you see a circled 2 or a circled 6. That just means I'm using other notes in the scale to connect the chord tones. But you'll notice that I really am emphasizing the chord tones. I stay on them longer. It's like you're hopping rocks in a stream. Each chord tone is like an anchoring point in the melody, and the notes in between are just a tool to connect them. Leaving that little slide intro aside, we're opening bar 1 of our melody on the 10th fret of the B string. The note we're playing here is the A, the root of the first chord, and already a strong chord tone. And you can see on the diagram on the left where we can find this root in that second inversion, triad. Next is a full step bend up from the 12th fret on the B string. So that's a bend from the B to the C sharp. That's the major third, another chord tone that we can find in that basic triad pattern there. Release the bend back to the 12th fret and then pull off to the root again. This bend, release, pull off pattern connects the root and the major third and becomes somewhat of a motif in this solo. In bar 2, the chord is now E minor, so we change our triad shapes to the minor patterns to see where the chord tones for E minor are. Remember that a minor chord has a minor third. On the diagram on the left, you can see the pattern and the numbers have changed now. The melody, coming from bar 1, lands on the G on the 12th fret of the G string. And that's the minor third of that E minor chord. Now this G note here is a very interesting choice. It has a distinct sound and it may even come as a surprise. Although it's a chord tone of our E minor chord, it's the minor third, so it must be correct. But then why does it sound so special? Let me explain that, because I think it truly illustrates the power of playing chord tones. See, we started our chord progression with the A, we started our melody with the A, and then at the end of bar 1, after that little lick, our melody lands on the G. So our next stepping stone is that G here. Now, relative to that A, that G is the flat 7. Now, in a major pentatonic scale, in the A major pentatonic, there is no flat 7, so you wouldn't hit that note if you would improvise using a major pentatonic. In the full A major scale, also, there is no G. There's a G sharp, but there's no G. So where does that G come from? Well, if you look at the chords, these chords actually come from the key of D major. So by starting on the A and by starting our melody on A, we're actually implying the A mixolydian mode. And that mode has a flat 7. So that's where it comes from. Now, all this information is given to us just by playing that one note, and that's why it sounds so distinct. So even if you don't know anything about modes, and maybe I should do a lesson on modes, let me know in the comments. Even if you know nothing about modes, just by playing the chord tones, you're implying that sound. So learning these triads can be a bit of a challenge, but it's so rewarding because chord tones really help you to find those sweet spots in the harmony of your track. After that G, we're playing the same full step bend as we did in bar 1, that bend from the 12th fret on the B string. Next is the 12th fret on the E string. So hold the bend and then play the 12th fret on the E string as a very short staccatoed note. So the melody jumps up quite a bit here to that 12th fret on the E string, and it shows that you not always have to play the notes that are in between the chord tones. Every now and then you can play a bigger jump in your melody too, but as a general indication, I would say try to use these bigger jumps sparingly. They bring a nice contrast, but to stay melodic, focus on small intervals. Bar 3 uses the same ideas as in the previous two bars, now played over the G chord. First, play the G, that 12th fret on the G string, so the same note we started bar 2 with, but this time it's the root of the chord. So you see on the diagram on the left that the triad patterns have again changed to the major triad patterns, this time for the chord G. Next is that same bend, release and pull off pattern as in bar 1. That's the same lick, but the only difference is now how these notes relate to the root of the chord. So there's a different context, there are different chord tones, but it's the same lick. Bar 4 brings the first melodic phrase to an end, landing on the 11th fret of the G string. This is the F sharp, that's the major third that we can find in this first inversion position here. So again, you recognize the major triad patterns, we have only moved them to fit the D chord. When you write a guitar solo with chord tones, try to look for nice ways to connect the chords melodically. For example, try to look for chord tones that some of the chords in your progression have in common. These are often good starting points for finding a melodic line. In essence, if you strip my guitar solo of all its embellishments, what's left is this descending melodic line. A very simple idea. Let the chords do the work for you. At the end of bar 4 is a little pickup lick to the next melodic phrase. Play 2 muted 16 notes on the G string. I pick them down, up, so down, up. Then play the 9th fret on that string, followed by a hammer onto the 11th fret, back to the 9th fret with a pull-off. And this faster lick propels us back into the melody. Bars 5 to 8 follow the same chords as bar 1 to 4. Even better, bar 5 is completely identical to bar 1. Repetition is a great way of making your melody more memorable because it sounds familiar. And also this creates an opportunity to bring variation, because repetition creates an expectation in your audience, so it becomes your choice if you deliver on that expectation or if you want to play something different. So bar 5 is identical to bar 1, but you'll see in bar 6 that things start to change a little bit. Bar 6 starts just like bar 2 with that G on the 12th fret of the G string. But now our melody starts changing a little bit. In the other half of bar 6, we recognize our bend-release pull-off pattern that we would normally only expect to see again in bar 7. So it's the same lick but played over a different chord, this time the E minor chord. But the real variation comes in bar 7 with the full step bend from the 13th fret on the B string. So the pitch we're aiming for is this D here that we can find on the 15th fret of the B string in that first inversion triad that you can see on the diagram. So if you aim for a chord tone, you can just play the note plainly, or you can bend towards the note for some extra effect. And as I have told many times in my other lesson videos as well, bend with 3 fingers for some extra strength. Strike the bent note once more and then lift your 3rd finger to drop the pitch half a step, and then I release the string back to the B here on the 12th fret of the B string. That's another chord tone of the G, that's the major 3rd of that G. So this is just another way of connecting chord tones and moving from the first inversion triad to the basic triad of the G major chord. And I don't know if you feel it too, but after that lick, this really needs to resolve to an A. And that's exactly what we're doing in bar 8. We're concluding our second melodic phrase by playing that A again. Now the chord in bar 8 is D, so that A is the 5th of the underlying D chord. But it's also the note we started from. And we can find that A here in that first inversion of the D chord. To conclude, I hope you agree by now that playing basic chord tones in your guitar solos gives you a better connection to the overall harmony of your chord progression. You're able to play more melodic and more meaningful melodic phrases. After a while, I've noticed that by using this system of visualizing triad patterns, finding and playing these chord tones becomes somewhat of a second nature. These sounds really do get in your ear after a while, so I'm not thinking about the theory and the triad patterns as much as I used to when I'm improvising. So don't worry if this is all new, if this sounds theoretical. I suggest you print the chart that you can find in the PDF with the triad patterns on the first 3 strings. You start with those, and after a while you'll start getting used to those sounds and you won't be looking to the charts as much. So it's really a valuable system to bring out the harmony of the track in your improvisations, and you can use it alongside your favorite pentatonic scale. If you'd like me to expand on this topic, please let me know in the comments. In a future lesson we could look at the triad shapes on other string sets, we could look at other chord tones or tensions like the flat 7, or other types of triads, like diminished triads, for example, that you'll find every now and then in some of my solos too. If you found this lesson valuable, please subscribe to the channel. As of filming today, we're over 1100 subscribers strong, and I'm very thankful, very grateful for all your support, all your comments, your messages. It's very inspiring to me, so I hope I can give some of that inspiration back to you as we're all learning this beautiful instrument. If you're interested in the jam track for this solo, there's a link to that video in the description. Also, this jam track is now available in my Selfie store, and for the occasion I remixed and remastered the track completely to make it a little bit more punchy, and I'm quite happy with the result, I must say. And finally, a very special thank you to my supporters at buymeacoffee.com. If you want to, you can still buy me a coffee over there. That's very much appreciated. There's a link to that in the description. That wraps it up. I hope to see you again in the next video or lesson. Bye bye.